My wife cheated with my stepbrother, got pregnant, and I told her parents. Now she's cut off from her inheritance. I, 34M, and my wife, 29F, have been married for 2 years. Our relationship has been rather ordinary. We met at a work event many years ago, became friends for a few years, then realized we had feelings for one another and began dating. We dated for 3 years before I asked her to marry me, so we've been together for about 6 years. We never had any issues, either while courting or after we married. She is gorgeous, intelligent, and a wonderful partner for me. I have done my best to be a good husband to her, and we are happy together. Around 6 months ago, my stepbrother Darren, 28M, was sacked from his work. Instead of looking for another career, he opted to spend some time traveling and finding himself. Darren has always been unpredictable and spontaneous. My parents had a difficult time convincing him to go to college and earn a degree. He is constantly full of wacky ideas that he needs to be talked out of, but being dismissed from his job because he was intoxicated during a business meeting is serious. Despite his history, he resolved to quit drinking. Despite my fears that he would abandon this project halfway through, I attempted to be supportive for my father's sake. My parents divorced while I was a child, and my father married Darren's mother when I was a teenager. So when Darren asked if he could stay at my house for a few weeks to tour New York, I wasn't sure how to say no. I was suspicious and unwilling to do it, but when my father and stepmother urged me to let him stay, I couldn't say no. I questioned my wife, and she said she was fine with it, so I grudgingly gave in. Darren came to live with us 2 months ago. I made it clear that he could not bring anyone into the flat, and that even if he could leave and return anytime he pleased, it should not disrupt our sleep. Surprisingly, he agreed with all of my rules. For the first few days, he stayed out virtually all night, and I even saw him arrive as late as 7 a.m., when I was already up and preparing for work. Aside from that, he was fairly polite, having supper with me and my wife at our home and even cooking for us on a few occasions. I was pleasantly surprised. This was not the Darren I'd known my entire life. My wife and I had scheduled a weekend trip to Vegas the second weekend Darren was staying with us because I had worked there. We told Darren to take care of the place until we returned. Everything was planned, but my wife developed a severe stomach flu at the last minute. It was Thursday night and we were meant to leave the next morning. We were both really unhappy, but we assumed she would go if she felt better. Unfortunately, her illness worsened the next morning, and by the time we were scheduled to depart, she was too ill to travel. I tried to reschedule my job commitment and postpone our trip, but it was too late, and I needed to travel. I felt terrible about leaving her in that state, but I knew Darren would be there in case her health worsened. He offered to stay at home and cook her meals as well. I vowed to return as early as possible on Saturday morning and then left. Looking back, I can't believe I didn't see that coming. So I went to Vegas by myself, returned the next day, and found that my wife was doing better. I didn't think much of it at the time, but after that weekend, I noticed Darren was home more frequently than usual. Previously he went out every day, but now he hasn't left the flat in several days. I asked whether everything was fine, and he just shrugged, claiming he was trying to save his money. I didn't think much of it at first, but as time passed, I began to notice more things that stood out. When I returned from work one day, I discovered that my wife had already arrived home. Apparently, she had taken a half day off due to a headache and forgot to notify me. Another day, I arrived home early and noticed Darren and my wife entering the house together. They stated that they had just met outside the building. This could just be a coincidence, but I had a horrible feeling about it. I had never questioned my wife's devotion before, and while Darren was a messy person, I didn't think he could do something so heinous as that. Still, I couldn't ignore the impression that something was off. I knew I couldn't accuse them of anything without evidence, and doing so would cause upheaval in my family, which I wasn't prepared to cope with. So I took a straightforward approach. I asked Darren how long he planned on staying with us. I reminded him that while it was fantastic to have him around, he should think about his future moves. Thankfully, he caught the message and stated he'd be leaving within a week. My wife was in the room during the chat, but she said nothing, which made me uneasy. Darren moved out, and I attempted to ignore my misgivings, concentrating on my marriage rather than worrying about the worst-case situation. Things improved after he departed, and I began to believe I had been overly paranoid. I was mortified to think that my wife would do something like that, especially because she had been the perfect spouse all these years. However, around 2 weeks ago, something happened. We discovered that my wife was pregnant, 2 months to be exact. You probably know where this is headed. When Darren moved in with us 2 months ago, I felt sick to my stomach. I'll offer you some context. I am a few years older than my wife, as I previously stated. By the time I was 30, I was ready to settle down and establish my own family. When my wife and I first started dating, I knew she was the one for me and wanted to marry her. However, she believed she was too young to have children and wanted to wait a few years before making that decision. Though it wasn't what I desired, I approved of her choice. We always took precautions since we decided to wait until she was 30 to start looking for children. My wife always insisted we be very careful since her body reacts poorly to hormonal birth control and she is not on any tablets. I also always utilized protection. Accidents do happen, of course, but I could not get over the sense that something was off. I felt the timing to be unsettling. She said she wanted to keep the baby, that although this was unplanned, it was a good thing and we ought to be glad. Long since I had desired children. Under different conditions I would have been ecstatic, but instead I was in excruciating pain. Though I attempted to seem content to my wife, I don't think I have ever felt worse. Uncertain of what to do, I wanted no one to criticize me, thus I couldn't talk to any of my friends about it. Nevertheless, I couldn't get rid of the bad ideas and emotions. I knew I couldn't continue living in total anguish after about 1 week. I had to face my bride. I knew this would have a terrible effect on our marriage, and should I turn out to be mistaken, she might never pardon me. But I kept thinking of the worst. The prospect of her carrying the baby of my stepbrother made me sick. After our first visit, completed several blood tests and procedures, all I could feel was total devastation. I decided to talk to her as I could no longer handle it and got ready for the worst. I told her I had to talk to her about something quite crucial about a week ago during supper. She wanted to know straight away. Though afraid, I aimed to be as direct as I could. I apologized for feeling this way, but I questioned her whether she actually carried my child. My question seemed to her startled. Her whole face flushed red, and she began shouting, accusing me of being a monster for questioning her and committing something so terrible. She said she had never strayed from me. She wondered where all this was coming from, and I told her it was too much of a coincidence she was 2 months pregnant, the same length of time Darren had left. She became much more irate as a result and began yelling even more. Seeing the situation becoming bad, I tried to cool her down and get her to pay attention to me. I told her it hurt for me to live with these uncertainties. I told her about the events that occurred during Darren's stay, wishing I had no harbors of uncertainty and felt something was off. She seemed to relax a little and assured me she knew I had questions, but she also advised me to believe her and our marriage would be stronger. Though I felt awful, I told her I wished I could just ignore these ideas. Having attempted, I wanted a paternity test following the birth if there was really nothing to worry about. I even said I knew how tough this must be for her, but I had to be sure for my own peace of mind. She seemed to be really more extreme than I had expected, so clearly I didn't expect her to be entirely cool with this and felt she might flare out a little. If she was angry before, the reference to a paternity test sent her off. She said I was nasty and she couldn't believe I would force her to go through something so embarrassing over my crazy thoughts. Though I attempted to remain cool, really seeing her so against the concept made me feel as though my suspicions were vindicated and I started to get enraged. I told her this was an ultimatum, that if she disagreed, I doubted we could be together. She admitted she needed time to consider it, and this seemed to help her somewhat relax. That evening we slept in different rooms. We said nothing to one another the next morning before reporting to work. I fantasized the worst case scenario as the truth all day. The remainder of the week reflected that. She would ignore me and arrive home late at night. She grew upset every time I tried to chat to her, so I finally gave up. I had no notion she was merely deciding on her next action. When I got up in the morning last Thursday, I discovered she had not returned home the evening before. She never responded when I texted her many times. I had to report to work, but I was so agitated that I couldn't concentrate and so left early for home. I waited hours for her, but I grew rather concerned when she still hadn't returned home by 9 p.m. and would not answer my calls. Not sure what else to do, I asked her assistant at work about her. My surprise was that she hadn't been to work and had taken 2 personal days. Her assistant expressed amazement at my ignorance of this. I was somewhat concerned at that point and phoned some of her friends to see whether she was with any of them. I started picturing the worst when all of them claimed they hadn't heard from her. I fretted about her leaving me or about something happening to her. I asked my mother-in-law, MIL, a last resort, whether she was with her. She wasn't, but upon learning my wife had vanished for 2 days, my MIL started to get really concerned. She promised to try to get to her and let me know whether there was any update. Should she still be inaccessible, we agreed to phone 911. I was completely terrified in the next half hour, but suddenly my wife called. She stated she was absolutely fine, wanted some time to sort things out, and that I had no need to stress her out for no cause or involve her mother. She sounded even angry, very apathetic. I became enraged when she showed no regard for freaking me out, but I calmed down and asked her where she was and when she was returning. She hung up, then declared she would be returning early the next morning. Frayed and somewhat angry, I went to bed. I considered spending some time apart from her. I had no idea what lay ahead of me. The next morning she woke me up and seemed especially content. She stated she was fixing a problem, when I asked her where she had been the day before. Trust me when I say I spent weeks considering every conceivable scenario that might go wrong. What she said next was crazier than anything I could have imagined. She explained that this pregnancy was killing our marriage and causing foolish questions in my head, hence she decided to rescue our marriage by means of an abortion. She met my eyes squarely and stated, now I had no reason to question her loyalty, we could start our marriage anew. I looked astounded. I had never used that word and really meant it before in my life. I simply asked her if she was kidding after just staring at her. She stated she was totally serious and hoped I could unwind now and stop allowing stupid worries to disturb me anymore. That served as my breaking point. After several more minutes of staring at her, I stood up and departed. Spending another second with her worried me that I would have some kind of mental collapse. She started to follow me, but if she wanted peace, I advised her to avoid me. I guess my tone was severe enough to stop her. I phoned my attorney on the way out of the building to let her know I was divorcing my wife and needed to start the process immediately. I also scheduled a meeting for the following morning and advised her we had to make sure my wife missed a penny of my money. Though I had no idea exactly how things would turn out, I knew what I had to do. I asked Darren where he was when I phoned. He claimed to be in Atlanta, someplace. I asked him not to waste my time. Simply admit that they had slept together. I was divorcing my wife. He said nothing for a few minutes, then simply apologized to me. That helped me too. I understood there was nothing else to say. For the evening I checked into a hotel and got ready for what I knew was in store. I woke up the next morning, headed straight to my attorney, and gave her all the specifics, the infidelity, the abortion, everything. She claimed that we did have a shot, even though it's tough to have a clean divorce with no alimony unless both sides come to a mutual understanding, as my wife has a high-paying job of her own and is most certainly the one at fault here. Really, I was more concerned with the cause than with the money. With this woman I was finished. She could be very frigid, which astounded me. It seemed like I had lived all these years among strangers. The person I loved and married would not be able to do anything this crazy. She had slept with my stepbrother, but there was still a possibility she was pregnant with my baby. Now we would never know. Changing my plans to suit her wants, and doing everything I could to be a decent husband, after almost 6 years in this marriage, this is what I received. Inquiring whether she was at work, I phoned her assistant. She became. I urged her not to tell my wife I phoned and lied about arranging a surprise for her. I then headed home, loaded as many of her items as I could into 3 suitcases, and arranged them in the hall. Changing our locks and phoning a locksmith came next. I wanted no sight of her. I wanted her out of my house, gone. Not wanting to be home when she got back, I then stuffed some of my own items in an overnight bag and headed back to my hotel. It was almost 5 p.m. by the time everything was finished, and I was worn out, physical and psychological. I slept on the bed and nodded out as soon as I got to my motel. My phone rang when I woke up. In fact, it was my wife, but I chose to treat her with the same indifference that she had shown me the day she obtained the abortion behind my back. She persisted in phoning, and I ignored a million books that she recommended. Regarding all that, I had nothing to say to her. She stopped at last after over an hour of unrelenting calls. She had apparently given up, but then I received a text from Darren stating she had contacted him and inquired as to whether I had spoken with him. It was finished, he informed her. I knew everything. Again over text, he apologized. I couldn't care less. Not texting him either, I started considering what to do next. The following phase was where I might have gone a little too far, but I was devastated and embarrassed. What else to do eluded me. One thing you should know about my wife is that she is from a quite traditional Southern background. They do things a particular way over there, and since we were married, she has been under pressure to have children. I had been on her side at every family gathering for years, helping to back our slow approach. I never once said that her desire to wait was the sole reason we weren't trying for children. I knew that her family would not be very happy if they discovered she had an abortion and cheated. I thus decided to phone my mother-in-law and simply be petty once in a lifetime. I gently went over everything with her and advised her that I was divorcing her daughter for betraying my confidence. She first doubted me and sounded embarrassed. About the abortion, I could show her the positive pregnancy test and the doctor's notes from our first appointment. Darren had previously acknowledged the affair. She may have her daughter clarify the rest. My wife was blowing up my phone in no time, exactly as I had anticipated. I tried to wait it out, but I ultimately picked up when she wouldn't stop after an hour and a half of unrelenting calling. Her answer was as predicted. She screamed I was ruining her life for no reason and she had nowhere to stay for the evening. She was beyond enraged. I informed her she was welcome to check into any hotel of her choice, but not to irritate me. I disregarded her attempts to prod me. She would be hearing from my lawyer shortly, and any correspondence from now on would go via our lawyers, I advised her. I also assured her that I would pack and deliver everything she desired wherever. She then told me she could forget about ever inheriting a cent from her parents, since her parents were quite enraged with her and declared she was no longer welcome in their family. From my in-laws, this was surprising. Although I expected them to be enraged, I did not believe they would act in this extreme manner. I obviously told my wife none of this. Rather, I advised her she should have considered this before turning around behind my back and that none of my concern was what her parents chose to do. Saying I shouldn't have dragged her parents into our marital troubles since now her life was shattered and she had nobody left, she labeled me immature and petty. I hung up on her and replied I couldn't care less. She then started texting me endlessly, calling every name under the sun, threatening to steal every dollar I had and cause me to repent everything. My father-in-law called me as well. He apologized to me for what his daughter had done. He was embarrassed of her. Hoping this would teach her a lesson, he informed me they were done letting her get away with anything. I was more than glad to provide him with the doctor's reports he requested. That was a couple hours ago, and my wife keeps contacting me. I'm thinking about just blocking her. But somewhere in the back of my mind there is a niggling voice reminding me I might have gone too far and ought to have kept this between the two of us. Although I absolutely have second thoughts about the divorce and I don't regret shutting her out of my apartment. I realize what a major blow it is to her to be cut off from her parents. Am I the asshole for telling my in-laws about my wife's adultery and abortion? Update 1. I want to thank everyone who helped me. Those of you who shared your own tales made me feel far less alone than I was feeling and also helped me relax about my response. Working through the divorce has not been simple. She is determined about receiving alimony and won't help me. We all know how complicated divorces can go, thus we have been trying to come to an understanding between us and avoid going to court. Unfortunately, it looks like she is handling this as an assault against her ego and does not give practicalities any thought. I am quite happy I had the wisdom to evict her from the apartment before she could get the pregnancy test and ultrasonic records, which I currently have with me. I have also discussed the overall matter with Darren. Though I am furious with him, he claims he will help and even testify if he has to. He has also blocked my wife on all conceivable platforms and avoided all interaction with her. He has apologized for what he did, not that his apology counts to me, but at least he isn't repeating her error as she did. Curiosity drove me to ask him specifics about the affair. He claimed it began the weekend I visited Paris and persisted for as long as he remained here. Reportedly, they also met a few times after he moved out. Regarding her pregnancy or abortion, he claimed he knew nothing. Though I am furious with him, I do need him to respond appropriately should things get that far off. Knowing that he depends on my dad financially, his funds have gone out, I also realize the only reason he is suddenly so thoughtful of my needs is clearly, my dad will be cut off completely should he exacerbate the problem in any form. According to my dad, Darren's lack of immediate cutoff is just a result of our maybe need for him should the divorce get messy. It hasn't been easy. I'm trying as hard as I can not let me snap at him. Apart from that I have moved into my apartment, otherwise, there is not any more positive news as yet. I cannot pretend to be sympathetic. I know exactly where she is. I am not likely to lose this flat as I have owned it for considerably longer than my marriage has lasted. For now just that is all. I am preparing for the divorce to get more ugly. I have no other option. Once things calm down enough, I'll attempt to let you know people. Update 2. I am formally divorcing you people. My last update was 6 months ago, hence I have been really busy. Things have advanced with the divorce since then. Originally challenging, my wife changed her behavior following multiple pre-trial hearings, depositions and settlement negotiations. It became evident that if we let this go to trial, it would only end badly for her. Darren answered under oath. Already, we had proof of her pregnancy. For her statement, we called in our OB/GYN, she supported us on everything. Especially exposing were the depositions. My wife had to respond to some difficult questions under oath, and her behavior, along with tail contradictions, only worked against her. Darren's deposition validated our suspicions. Although his apologies meant nothing to me, it was an important piece of proof. On his phone they also foolishly snapped some images in private situations during the encounter. She could not later on ignore the reality. We traveled to settlement conferences following the depositions. These were uncomfortable, but given her high-paying work and the strong proof of her infidelity, my wife's lawyers seemed to understand that pursuing alimony wouldn't be successful. Her request for alimony clearly wouldn't stand up in court. While we were ready to resolve things amicably, I wasn't going to be taken advantage of. My wife gave up at last. She committed herself to not claiming any alimony. Given her efforts during our marriage, the settlement also guaranteed that she would not get any more than what we decided upon. This was fair. I'm happy the last decision was taken without calling for a pointless trial that would have simply sapped my funds and time. She will have her own stuff. We have fairly split our shared assets. The settlement guarantees our ability to go on free from more entanglement. Though I am glad everything is over now, I cannot help but feel as though all of this has been a great waste of my time. Not only the divorce, but the entire marriage. I find it hard to believe I squandered time and effort and strayed from my intentions to start a family for someone who would not hesitate to toss it all aside for basically nothing. I appreciate your support and counsel all around. It has been really helpful at this difficult period. If someone else is experiencing something like this, keep strong and rely on your support system. Things will improve. Update 3. Although I'm not sure whether anyone is still interested, I wrote in this subreddit at the start of the year and it has been a few months since my last update. I heard from my dad a few hours ago. Not expecting much, I picked up and was genuinely perplexed about how to respond when he told me. Darren and my ex-wife apparently are seeing one other once more. I hadn't heard from any of them and didn't realize Darren came to the city after finding employment here. I suppose it was sufficient to reignite their love and she apparently forgot all the slights she had aimed at him during the divorce. I get turned off. I feel duped and that someone made a fool of me. According to my dad, He has made it abundantly evident to Darren and my stepmother that he wants nothing to do with him going forward. At least, having my old dad by my side feels great. Still, that is that. I don't think I will have any more updates for you folks, as I hope I won't hear anything about this anymore. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.